Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a truly fascinating missing piece of ancient history. We're talking about the constantly underrated third party of the ancient world, the Phoenicians. Seriously, if you've always thought the foundations of Western civilization rested entirely on the shoulders of Greece and Rome, well, prepare to have your perspective completely shifted. So let me ask you, who actually built the Mediterranean as we know it? The traditional narrative almost always points straight to Greece and Rome, right? We're taught they just single-handedly laid the foundations of the modern world. But long before Rome was even a regional power, and way before Athens was busy building the Parthenon, the Phoenicians had already stitched together the coasts of the Levant, North Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain. They turned it all into one singular, booming economic network. They didn't just participate in the ancient world, they literally engineered its infrastructure. Now, you might be wondering, if they were so absolutely crucial, why are they basically treated as a mere footnote in our history books? Well, it simply comes down to who held the pen. The Phoenicians wrote on perishable papyrus, and over millennia, that just crumbled away. So almost everything we know about them actually comes from their fierce rivals. The Greeks stereotyped them in texts like Homer as these tricky, untrustworthy merchants. And the Romans? Oh, when they destroyed the Phoenician city of Carthage in 146 BCE, they didn't just burn down buildings. They deliberately destroyed or gave away the libraries, effectively erasing the Phoenician perspective from history entirely. Because of that, we're forced to do some incredible historical detective work just to piece their story back together. Let's jump right into Section 1, Engineering the Open Sea, from coastal craft to deep water titans. Think about this for a second. Before the Phoenicians came along, ancient civilizations used the exact same basic boats for both raiding and trading. The Phoenicians looked at that and realized it was wildly inefficient. So they brilliantly bifurcated their fleet. On one side, they engineered what was called the Gaulos, basically the tub. This was a broad, round merchant ship powered by a massive linen sail. It allowed a really tiny crew to transport dozens of tons of heavy cargo over huge distances. On the flip side, to protect those slow merchant ships, they invented the Bireme. They stacked oarsmen into two vertical tiers. This doubled the speed without widening the ship, and then they added a bronze ram to the front. They effectively turned the ship itself into a high-speed missile. But the real mechanical genius is hidden right beneath the surface. They didn't just sew planks together like their neighbors did. No, they pioneered the mortise and tenon frame. This interlocking wooden shell created a rigid spine that could actually withstand the violent deep-sea forces of the Atlantic Ocean. And to top it off, they built these titans out of the perfect material, the highly rot-resistant cedar of Lebanon. It grew straight, tall, and incredibly dense, giving them a massive material advantage over literally anyone else in the ancient world. With these absolute units of ships, they did the unthinkable. They completely abandoned the ancient, safe practice of hugging the coastline and anchoring every night, and they just sailed straight into the open sea. How? By mastering celestial navigation. They figured out that Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper, provided a far more unwavering northern bearing than the Big Dipper ever did. The Greeks were so impressed they literally called it the Phoenician Star. They also used sounding leads coated in tallow to sample the mud and sand on the seafloor, essentially reading the bottom of the ocean to pinpoint their exact location. It was a total game changer. It sliced days off transit times and opened up true global trade. Moving on to Section 2, the Alphabet Revolution, Democratizing the Written Word. Picture the incredible barrier to entry that existed back then. If you wanted to write in Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, you had to memorize hundreds and hundreds of dense, complex characters. It took a lifetime to master. Because of this, literacy was basically a weapon of control. It was an elite monopoly held exclusively by royal scribes and palace priests. And then the Phoenician breakthrough. 22! Just 22 purely acoustic letters, one sign for one sound. It was so elegantly simple that a regular merchant could learn it in a matter of weeks just to keep track of their trade logs. That single invention completely stripped the scribes and priests of their monopoly and democratized information right across the ancient world. Now here is where things get really wild. What happened when the Greeks encountered this script? It kicked off a massive butterfly effect. The Greeks adopted the Phoenician letters, but they made this brilliant little tweak. They repurposed a few of the Phoenician breath sounds into vowels. Suddenly, writing wasn't just for accounting or logging cargo anymore. It became a mirror for human speech. This is what allowed oral traditions like Homer's Iliad to finally be frozen in text. It allowed Thucydides to write critical history, and it allowed philosophers like Plato and Aristotle to externalize their complex logic on papyrus to be debated and critiqued. Basically, the entire intellectual explosion of classical Athens was fueled by this exact Phoenician interface.
All right, let's look at Section 3, Paying the Assyrian Empire, the Economics of Survival.
It is absolutely fascinating to look at ancient Assyrian art, like the famous Balawat gates, because it gives us a direct window into this crazy geopolitical dynamic. The Assyrians had the most terrifying land military, but zero naval presence. So they used the Phoenicians as an indispensable economic engine. The relief carvings literally show the city of Tyre keeping its island autonomy, while Phoenician merchants in these small boats called hippoi ferry massive, endless tributes of silver, tin, and the ultra-luxurious Tyrian purple dye directly to the Assyrian mainland. But of course, this created a brutal, repeating life cycle of extraction. It started off with Shalmaneser III, where the Phoenicians simply paid a tribute to keep their freedom. But things escalated fast. Tiglath-Pileser III actually installed direct tax inspectors to monitor their ports. When the Phoenicians inevitably rebelled against those crushing taxes, kings like Sennacherib launched brutal punitive campaigns, forcing Phoenician royals to literally flee on their own warships. By the time we get to Esarhaddon, the duress was absolute. I mean, Assyrian victory monuments literally depicted the king of Tyre held on a leash with a hook through his lip. Total nightmare. And yet, they survived. While the Assyrians possessed the swords, the Phoenicians held the global keys to the ledger, the ships, and the silver. The Assyrian war machine simply couldn't afford to completely destroy them because they desperately needed the global wealth that only Phoenician ships could provide. They managed to weather the storm through sheer undeniable economic indispensability. Finally, Section 4, Blueprints of Western Civilization, the what-if scenario. Let's play a quick game of what-if. If you completely remove the Phoenicians from the historical equation, the world we live in becomes practically unrecognizable. Without their 22-letter alphabet, Europe might have been stuck using clunky syllabaries, delaying widespread literacy by centuries. Without their maritime trade routes connecting Spanish silver and British tin all the way to the east, the Mediterranean probably remains economically isolated and totally fragmented. They were the ones who brought Near Eastern urban planning straight to the wild, rugged coasts of Europe. And here is the ultimate historical irony. By establishing their massive colony of Carthage over in North Africa, the Phoenicians inadvertently forged the Roman Empire. When the Punic Wars broke out, Rome was really just a regional agrarian land power. To defeat Carthage, Rome had to literally reverse engineer a wrecked Carthaginian warship and mass-produce a fleet. Carthage was the crucible. Without that intense do-or-die pressure, Rome might never have expanded into Sicily, Sardinia, and Spain, and might never have become a global maritime empire in the first place. Which leaves us with this lingering, pretty provocative thought. The Romans burned the Phoenician libraries, their literature is lost forever, and we honestly know almost nothing about how they viewed themselves. But every time a historian writes a book praising Rome's greatness, every time a philosopher types out a thesis, and every single time we send a text message on our phones today, we are using the direct genetic descendants of the 22-letter system they gave us. They basically encoded themselves permanently into the cognitive DNA of global civilization. So I leave you with this. Between the empires that faded into dust and the marginalized mariners who actually gave us the written word, who really won the ancient era?